Hey everyone, so thank you for joining this episode of the Fuchsia Firewall Gradient's podcast. My name is Matt Topper, Director of Security here at Gradient, and I have with us Gareth Young. And Gareth, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Matt said, my name's Gareth Young. I'm the founder and chief architect of Levacloud. Um, I guess I'll talk a little bit about Levacloud and drive your editors crazy
Yeah.
and give them something to cut out here. So, founder and chief architect of Levacloud. We're a Microsoft cybersecurity consulting company. We have people both here in Georgia and also up in New York. We're experts in the Microsoft security stack and the tools within it. Um, Basically, we help our customers maximize the usage of the security capabilities within their existing licensing, and we also help optimize the security and compliance investments that they're making through adoption of advanced security capabilities. The majority of the work that we do is in enterprise. We've got a primary focus in healthcare, but we do also work with finance, tech, government, and higher education as well.
Awesome, and thanks for joining us, Gareth. I know you're an expert on Microsoft security and how to properly set up your 365 Azure environment. And that's really what I think the topic of today's interview is. We have a lot of people in the IT consulting space, the MSP space. Many of them are 365 partners, both using it internally and for their clients. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about some things that maybe some partners aren't aware of, or just ways to secure their environments better. But before we start, I'll frame it with one thing to keep in mind, and that is most organizations in this space have business premium licensing. Um,
Yeah.
so things that are in
Well,
like E3 and E5 may not fit them.
it's actually a really cool thing because I did put some thought to this before we got together, based on your feedback. And there's some surprises in Business Premium, and I'm going to touch on some of those today. So yeah, I think that's good to know.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so I guess I don't want to steer the conversation myself too much, and
So
I'll kind of let you go at it. I have a couple of questions to start with, but if you have things you want to talk about,
yeah,
let's just go for that.
for sure. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk about some of what I would consider to be overlooked Microsoft security capabilities. You know, just based on my experience, either capabilities that people aren't really using or fully valuing, or maybe not using to kind of the fullest. And I'm going to try and frame this in the lens of an MSP and potentially like how an MSP can use some of these capabilities with their own customers. Um, and just for an added bit of fun, um, I'm going to kind of do this in a way that aligns it with the different pillars of Microsoft's Zero Trust framework, which is
Awesome.
a whole other topic in itself, honestly. Uh, but yeah, I figured that would be the best way to kind of try and map this one out.
I think so
So
too. I think that's awesome.
awesome. Okay, so starting out here with the identities pillar of the Zero Trust framework. Um, there's a capability within Microsoft 365 that often gets really undervalued and overlooked called Microsoft Secure Score. Now, it's essentially a self-service tool to help you increase the security posture both within your own environment, and also you can use it as a way to show customers like, hey, here's what your security looks like just now within your Office 365 environment, and here's things we can do as, I guess, your MSP to help improve that. It gives your like the current score of the environment, and it also compares it to other organizations that are similar, to whoever the tenant belongs to, and then literally suggests improvement actions, and even gives instructions on how to implement those improvement actions. And the really cool thing with this is it's free. It comes in all licensing SKUs, whether you got Business Basic, Business Premium, E3, whatever. Um, Now, I frame it in the sort of lens of identity, but actually the more licensing capabilities that you enable, the more stuff will show up in there. And yeah, you can find that by going to the security kind of admin dashboard.
So on Secure Score, I've seen this question come up, and not everyone may know about it. Is there a way to indicate a recommendation as something you decide that you're not going to implement, or maybe the recommendation is for something you're not licensed for? Can MSPs do that, or go through and say, NA this one?
That's a great question because it's very contextual, right? In some instances, you might be providing a third-party solution that solves for something that's in the list, and it lets you go in and indicate, solved through third-party solution, for example, and then the score will update to kind of reflect that. So yeah, 100%. And I guess as well as a point of interest, there's also a piece in there that allows you to say, these items are planned, and then it'll show you like, here's where you are just now, and this is where you're going to be when you implement the planned items. Don't wave my hands in front of the camera. And that's just a really good way to show, progress and direction, I guess, to those customers.
Yeah, and that can be a great way, even if you're new to 365, there may be some things in there that you didn't even know about, not only from a checklist perspective to remind yourself, but if you may not have realized you can implement some of those things.
For sure. So yeah, that's that piece. And I guess moving along from there, I'll talk a little bit about the endpoints pillar of Zero Trust. So
Yeah.
I'm sure, MSPs out there, they have their preferred device management platforms, and that's fine. Maybe some of them are using Endpoint Manager, which comes included with Business Premium. Maybe they're not.
Mm-hmm.
That little piece is irrelevant. So key thing, within Endpoint Manager or Intune, which is Microsoft's device management capability, there's a feature called App Protection Policies that are applicable to iOS and Android. And I feel like these could be a really good complement to even the third-party device management that you might be doing with your customers today. So essentially, the problem that they solve for, within every customer, you're going to have some users that are doing a bring your own device scenario with their mobile phone. And the risk of data loss through unsecured BYOD devices is pretty huge, to be honest. Now, but as I mentioned, Business Premium and upwards includes that kind of Intune license to give you access to this feature. And what it allows you to do is actually secure, from a data loss perspective, all of the Microsoft first-party like Office applications, so Outlook, PowerPoint, OneDrive, that kind of thing, on those iOS and Android devices. And the key thing with this is the device doesn't actually need to be brought under management at all. This literally wraps like a secure container around those mobile apps, because a lot of the time, and users can be kind of like, hey, you're not managing my personal device. I don't want you touching it.
Right.
So this just offers a really kind of light touch to wrap some security around company data on those devices. And I guess to kind of go a step further than that, people listening might say, well, that's all well and good. You're securing those Office applications. But what if someone's using something like Apple Mail, for example? Well, in that instance, if you can kind of have the conversation with your customer or within your organization to say, let's standardize on these Microsoft productivity apps for signing into email and, work things, with Business Premium, knowing that that's something that a lot of the customers have, you also have access to a capability called conditional access. It's part of Azure AD Premium P1. And combining that with these app protection policies, you can actually create a rule that stops people from signing in on an unmanaged device using anything other than those Microsoft apps, enforcing, that policy of standardization.
And so, oh, sorry, don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
So you would still get the the benefits of device enrollment as far as data protection, right? Like how Android Enterprise has the container and you're able to keep corporate data separate from personal data, right? You can set restrictions on
Yeah,
copying and all that stuff without having to enroll the device.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, taking that example, this is kind of like a layer down from there. Instead of having that management at the device level, essentially, we're purely just wrapping it around those Microsoft applications. And it's just really good for situations where the users are really steadfast on not wanting any sort of device management on the device. In this instance, it's purely at the app level sort of thing. And because it isn't like a full enrollment, it can be used as a good complement to, maybe you already have a third-party capability as an MSP that you're using to manage, corporately owned devices. Um, so I see this seldom used. Like I do still see a lot of organizations that are open from a BYOD perspective. So that's why I kind of thought it'd be a good one to include for the endpoint side of things here.
I think that's a great one. I mean, in the MSP space, and right, so my background is MSP. Before I came into Gradient, we had that issue internally in that we had a large number of staff who didn't have email on their phones because they didn't want to enroll their phones in device management, and that's a great solution for that. Is this the feature that's sometimes called or known as MAMWE? I think I see it called that
Yeah,
occasionally on the web.
that's exactly it. MEM, yeah, managed application management or something. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one. Um,
So if you see that, guys, that's what this is. Yeah,
cool.
appreciate
Okay.
it.
So I guess moving along here, we're now going to talk a little bit about the application pillar of the Zero Trust framework and a capability in there that is awesome, honestly. So business premium, looking at it in that lens again, it comes with Azure AD Premium P1, and as part of that, you get a license feature called Cloud App Discovery that nobody's ever really heard of. So um, essentially, there's a part of the Defender toolset called Defender for Cloud Apps. It used to be called Cloud App Security. You can log into it by going to portal.cloudappsecurity.com. And there's this one feature in there that does come with Business Premium or Azure AD Premium P1 called Cloud App Discovery. And essentially, what it allows you to do is take firewall traffic logs, whether it's just a snapshot of them or Microsoft has a virtual appliance available that you can deploy on premise to gather them in and then automatically upload them. And this cloud discovery dashboard, it takes in all of those logs and it'll actually discover within them all of the different web applications, SaaS applications, third-party apps out there that users are accessing. And it gives this really nice kind of graphical report that tells you how much data is going to each one. Depending on what's in the logs for the firewall, it might even tell you who's accessing it. And it gives each app a risk score. And that's really good because not only does it allow you to look and see, are there any risky apps on here that are potentially malicious that a user might be going to? For example, I had a customer recently where we kind of set this up and looked at it, and it turned out someone was using one of those like PDF document converters online, which was,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Dodgy. And also, it helps for identifying shadow IT as well, which is an ongoing problem. Certain departments that want to do their own thing instead of doing what the rest of the company's doing, kind of thing. Um, and yeah, it gives you a really easy to consume report. And honestly, like as an MSP, you might even be able to wrap a service around this one feature. It's quite powerful.
This is a huge feature. We use that here as well, right? And the example I always use is um, we standardize on OneDrive, right? So I want to know if somebody is using Dropbox for anything. And for the MSPs out there, this can also work at the endpoint level using capabilities of Defender. And the thing to point out there is that if you are putting out another EDR solution to your client, Sentinel-1 or whatever, Defender can still get that in its monitor-only type mode. It doesn't need to be the primary for the discovery piece. It does need to be the primary if you're going to the full license for cloud app security where you can block it, but for the discovery, it works alongside another EDR solution you might have out there, and it's really, really powerful.
Yeah.
And I think, Gareth, right, you can do things like in the apps have alerts if there's an app that doesn't have a SOC 2 or a compliance report, and even get down to that level. Like there's some intelligence around the classification in there.
Yeah, there is. It gives you all that in the kind of risk report. On the alerting side of it, I don't know if that's in Business Premium or if you need to kind of step up, but when you do kind of step up to the full license, it will like report you when new risky applications are detected and stuff like that. And to your point as well, Matt, that Defender for Endpoint or even Defender for Business, if you want to call it that, the new thing that the new EDR solution they're bundling with Business Premium, the ability for that to, it's really like the tick of the box, upload all of that traffic information automatically is extremely powerful, especially if your users are kind of decentralized and maybe, drawing it from the firewall's no good because lots of people are working from home and they're just going out via their local internet pop or whatever.
Right. Or if you're, some organizations now don't even really have a firewall or network, right? They're virtual companies.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. So yeah, really powerful. Not a lot of people know it exists, so definitely check that one out. So moving along here, start to think about what they call the data pillar. And I'm going to mention a feature that people might already know about and might think they're using it effectively, but I find a lot of times they're not. And that feature is the Office 365 data loss prevention capability. Now, it is in Business Premium. It's also included with like the base level E3 license and up. And out of the box, it creates a policy that's just like, I think it's literally called like recommended data loss prevention policy or something like that. So that's what you get when you just turn on the license and leave it to do its thing. And all that policy does is just generate alerts that a lot of time people aren't even looking at. So highly recommend going into the compliance portal where the configuration for this exists and taking a look at some of the different policies you can set up, because actually this capability includes templates that are applicable to like several industry verticals. So for example, there's a HIPAA one in there, and you can customize them and tune them, based on the business need. Like let's say you turn it on, you're seeing a lot of false positives, you can go in there and kind of tune that out. And additionally, the standard policy, like I say, it only alerts, whereas when you go in and enable an actual policy, and configure it for your customer or internally, if someone tries to take a document with 10 social security numbers and email it out, it'll literally block that, which is really powerful. And also, not everything's malicious, right? Sometimes users are just trying to get their job done and do it the easiest way. So it'll provide a policy tip or feedback to them to say, hey, you can't share it this way, do it this way instead. So very powerful. It'll cover at that licensing level Exchange Online and also OneDrive and SharePoint shared links. Highly recommend going in there and moving away from that default policy that's put in place to provide much more robust coverage that your users are paying for already.
Will this also help with identifying data that's stored in existing documents, right? Somebody has a spreadsheet with credit cards or SSN numbers in there. Can you find that with this license of DLP?
So, no, the purpose of this capability is to basically protect data when it's in transit, whether it's someone trying to send an email or someone trying to generate a shared link from within SharePoint or OneDrive. Is to stop, that sensitive data from being leaked, essentially. Now,
Hmm.
there is another capability that can be used to identify data at rest with sensitive information in it. It's called, well, it's called content search. You will also find that within the compliance portal. Um, Not 100% sure off the top of my head if that's in Business Premium or not, but we can always kind of double check that. But essentially, the
Uh,
content search feature, you can go in there and program in, you know, um, you could basically do a content search based on the sensitive information types, the things that are inside those DLP policies that it's looking for when it's doing its job. You can take those and put them into the search feature, and it will search all the data at rest across, your, well, SharePoint and OneDrive for sure. Exchange is a little bit different. It
right.
can't really crawl the mailboxes.
No, that's a really good point. We previously tested that, but it was in a mixed tenant that had 90 business premium licenses and like 4 or 5 E3, E5, and fortunately or unfortunately, it seemed like it was one of those features that you get one E5 license and the whole feature opens up to the tenant, despite that not being legal or license compliant.
Yeah,
So we'll go back and check whether that's a business premium or not. I don't know either without looking it up.
for sure. The next one I'll cover, and possibly the last one that's appropriate to business premium, um, is the infrastructure pillar. Now, with infrastructure, we're kind of starting to move a little bit out of the realms of Office 365 and just touching a bit on Azure. But I kind of figured that, there's going to be MSPs out there that their customers have at least some sort of workload in Azure, maybe servers, that kind of thing. So I figured it'd be worth just drawing attention to one really cool feature within Azure that's actually completely free. So if you are managing a customer that has Azure infrastructure, have a look at Microsoft Defender for Cloud. It has a free capability called Cloud Security Posture Management. And literally, what that'll do when you turn it on is give you a secure score, a little bit like the one we talked about on the Office 365 side, but this time specifically for Azure. And it will also provide you with visibility to what the current security posture is and give you guidance on how you can harden those workloads in Azure. So this is completely free.
Oh, that's awesome. I do think a lot of organizations and certain, maybe not clients, but a lot of MSPs do have at least some infra up in Azure. It's really, really common now.
Yeah, and there is a paid tier that gives you a lot more, and it gives you you can protect the workloads and all that kind of stuff. But the free tier, it's free. You might as well turn it on, and it just gives you a one up from a security perspective as the provider helping that customer with their stuff in Azure.
Um, one thing I'd like to bring up that I don't know if you were going to mention this, but it's like my favorite lesser known feature, and that is the limited experience you can get for Exchange Online in
Oh yeah.
non-compliant devices. Is that a business premium feature as well?
Um, I am not sure. I would. I am not sure
I
because I
think it is.
because to complement that one, you also have the kind of SharePoint OneDrive equivalent of that, where you can provide. And I don't think it really has any like specific licensing requirement because it's kind of built into the SharePoint and OneDrive admin portal. So I think as long as you have SharePoint and OneDrive, you're good to go. So it's probably the same on that piece. Because I guess if you think about it, that's the layer below starting to do conditional access policies, which are business premium.
Right. I think you're correct that having CA available is what allows you to use that. And for anyone who's not aware of this, the idea is if your conditional access policies otherwise require compliant devices, you can set up Exchange specifically is what I've seen this used for if you want to allow your users to be able to log in on a personal device or at a customer or something and have access to maybe view and reply to email, but not do things like download files and have the ability to have data that gets out of company device control, still gives you some ability to access your email and things like SharePoint, OneDrive, right? You can still use the web apps for editing something. You can't download anything.
Yeah, for sure. Really powerful stuff. Um, and I guess the last thing I would kind of say, I tried to relate this back to zero trust because it is something that's kind of very important to support the modern way of working. Unfortunately, it has become a bit of a buzzword, which can be a challenging thing to overcome with your customers. But as I like to say, the internet's your local network now. So the way we've been protecting things before in the past just doesn't scale to support modern work. Things are outside of your, network perimeter and in different devices, different locations, different SaaS services. And if you look at business premium holistically, for those that maybe don't have all of their or a lot of their customers on that yet, it is literally like soup to nuts zero trust as a product. It really is. I could like spend a whole podcast just talking about the capabilities in there. I think it's that powerful. But yeah, just wanted to kind of touch on that as well.
No, it's so huge and such a good point. Actually, I've never heard that internet is your. I'm gonna steal that. That's a
Feel
good
free.
one. um, some of the stuff we're talking about with modern workplace, and even that's a term that's kind of started to lose its meaning these days. But the modern workplace paradigm, one of the key tenets of that is you're joining your devices to Azure AD, and you know even if you're not a full cloud only environment, there's still so much value in doing that. Even if you have to go hybrid, like you just get so much benefit from your from both a security and from a compliance perspective, and the amount of things you can check off just by having a conditional access policy that requires compliant device. There's tons and tons of value on that, even if you don't have deep compliance
Yeah,
policies.
100%. Just touching on that, the hybrid side of things. Um, I see this more in the enterprise space where on-premise infrastructure is more prevalent. But there probably are SMB environments as well where the customer has stuff on-prem that they need to get access to. So within your business premium, you have a capability called Azure AD Application Proxy, and this feature is super cool. It allows you to publish on-premise web applications that the customer might have had popped through their firewall for years. Close off those firewall ports, install this little kind of app connector box, if you will, on-prem. It's just a little bit like Azure AD Connect, and then literally you can publish those applications securely through Azure AD and Office 365, and the user can kind of just get to those, from a URL like they would normally, but you're not leaving all these ports exposed to the internet. And I guess the reason I kind of went there with that is you can also layer in conditional access policies to protect access to those apps as well. Maybe you only want someone who's got a managed device to be able to sign into the HR system that you've got on-prem that's old and
Right.
in-house developed and put through the firewall or whatever. Yeah, business preview just has so much enterprise capability within it. It's really powerful.
Yeah, no open ports, and right, no exposing your corporate network to your user's home network like you would be doing with a VPN.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, Microsoft really is moving in a direction to kill off VPNs and, well, kill off passwords as well with their passwordless capabilities that they're starting to make available to people.
Yeah, that's actually a huge thing to talk about. That might be something that not everyone knows about, right? The ability to sign into to
Passwordless.
Windows with a 502 key.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, let's touch on that then. So Microsoft is all about killing the password. Um, And the way that they're enabling that is through a few different kind of technologies, FIDO2 being one, but also using the Authenticator app itself as well, which can be installed on iOS and Android. And essentially, when you have this all set up, you can do a couple of different things. You can sign into Office 365 without your password, and you essentially put the username in, and then it comes up and says, select this number in your app if you're using the app, and it would give you like a choice of 3 numbers, and you just tap it. Or, to your point, use the FIDO key to authenticate at that point as well. And the reason this is such a big deal is kind of twofold, I think. So one, we know that passwords are insecure. They get leaked on the dark web or whatever all the time. They're a problem. And also, when you have users with passwords that maybe they have a 90-day rotation on them, they get less and less secure every time. But number two, MFA has its issues, and passwordless solves one of the big ones that I see. So if you think about signing into Office 365 using traditional MFA with the Authenticator app, the user puts in their username and password, and then the Authenticator app, if we're using that, it pops up and says, hey, you're trying to sign in, approve or deny. Believe it or not, we've kind of got to a place now where users are getting so conditioned by clicking that approve button that threat actors are just popping passwords into the sign-in box. And it has happened where a user's just blindly kind of muscle memory hit the approve button when they're not even trying to sign in. And I like that by going to this passwordless model, you're either using a physical token or you're having to kind of think when you look at the Authenticator app and you're like, wait a minute, which number am I selecting? I'm not trying to sign in right now. So I think that's really quite powerful. And then
Yeah.
I guess the extension to that is, as you said, Matt, the ability to sign in passwordlessly to the laptop. That's enabled through a feature called Windows Hello for Business. And it's kind of the same deal again, moving away from the user having to type in a password all the time. They might be just using their FIDO key to sign into the device. And even those come in different flavors. It could be plugged into the USB. It could be one of those kind of near field chips. It might have like a biometric input on it. Or more traditional kind of Windows Hello things that you might be familiar with from your own computers, such as entering a PIN number or using, the facial recognition that might be built into the device. So yeah, really, really powerful stuff for sure. And it just kind of improves the experience for the user, I think, because they're not typing passwords all the time.
Yeah, I mean, anything that can get rid of that. The big thing I'm waiting on for that is for the ability to remove a password from an Azure account completely. You can't get rid of it yet, but you can get to the point where you don't really ever use it, and you can make it some 75 character thing you don't even really remember.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've got one person that I've been kind of helping out where they have a use case where their clients like mandating a 30-day password rotation, but they want to kind of get out of the password business and not have their users sort of deal with that. So we were looking at FIDO keys, but yeah, that limitation is kind of still a problem because you're right, there is a password there in the background.
Right.
I think we'll get there eventually, I'm sure.
I think on like Outlook.com consumer accounts, you do have the ability to remove passwords completely. So you have to feel it's coming if they're using that as the beta test for it.
Yeah, I think they guinea pig a lot of that stuff on the consumer products before they move it up. Because you kind of, I guess you kind of see it where, yeah, the passwordless started out there. It's now in the consumer cloud. And like some of it's starting to make its way into government cloud as well. But the features slowly kind of roll their way up.
It's just like it's getting there. Like a good example is on Windows on the device side, the ability to not use a password is in Pro, but the CSP requires Enterprise. So it's like
Yeah,
we're halfway to 2/3 of the way there.
yeah, for sure. And Microsoft is starting to open up more of those features, I've noticed. Like the bizarre one I ran into recently was um, so in those kind of the CSP policies that Matt's talking about are the kind of MDM policies that you can put onto Windows 10, whether it's through Endpoint Manager or maybe other third-party tools that are managing Windows 10 through MDM. And believe it or not, the ability to set a custom lock screen picture and wallpaper up until recently was also limited to the Enterprise edition of Windows 10. It's like, come on, guys. But I think they just
right?
changed that and they're committing to changing more from what I've heard.
Yeah, and to give Microsoft credit, I do see that more and more security features are coming down to pro and business, and there's um, less things that you would consider core security that are locked down to enterprise these days. It seems a lot of them fall into that nicer to have or extra customization or things. But Microsoft, to their credit, is not locking a lot of security things behind enterprise.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Business Premium is a prime example of that. The amount of capability in there. I mean, I only have like a small number of kind of SMB customers, but I just get really excited when they get on the Business Premium train just because there's so much stuff in there. And those guys really do need the help. And up until recently, a lot of like 2 years ago, all that capability was locked up in E5 security tools. It just, was unattainable for a lot of these smaller businesses that, understandably have smaller budgets for that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm just really excited to see more organizations adopt Business Premium now because it's going to change the game seriously, I think.
Yeah, it's an amazing what I would call it a great bang for buck in business premium. You can't beat it for anything.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Before we wrap up, anything else you wanted to cover or anything else you wanted to make sure we talked about?
Um, so those were kind of like the key things that I kind of grabbed out of each area. If there's anything else though you would like me to drill into, we've got the time. I'm definitely happy to. Um,
Oh, I have one. Let's talk about um, doing consent approvals for enterprise apps.
oh wow, yeah, that is a big
Just
one.
making sure to maybe we don't have to talk about it for 10 minutes, but just a reminder, like if you have an environment that's mostly Azure Premium or using SSO for a lot of things, make sure to do that so you're not like case number 900 million of, malicious app consent.
And okay, so let's do that, and then if you want, I can kind of bring up my little hit list of like the best practice things I like to go in and configure when I'm setting up Azure AD for the first
Oh
time.
yeah, that'd be awesome.
Um, because I got my little punch list. But on that one specifically, so yeah, out of the box, out of the box, Azure AD essentially allows anyone to consent for an application on behalf of the organization. It's pretty insecure. And an example of what that looks like is I always use Calendly as the example because it works on that kind of framework. So the user, so the calendar sharing app, for those that don't know, the user logs into the Calendly service, they click a button and it says, hey, do you want to give us access to your Office 365 so we can plug into your calendar or mailbox? And of course, they just button bash and say yes, right? Now, threat actors have taken advantage of that. There's malicious versions of these applications out there now that basically open the doors to them getting whatever they want out of your environment. Um, so within Azure AD, there's the ability to manage what consent looks like. There's a few different layers to it. You can either outright block it completely, and an admin has to go and set it up, or as Matt mentioned, there's the ability to have an approval chain where the user can request admin consent, and then the admin gets a notification. They can go in and review the application and then approve it to get access to the environment. Or there's a new capability that's just come along that even I've not really played with fully yet, where you can um, give the users the ability to approve allow their own apps access, but only based on the app requesting like low risk permissions into the environment. And it has an ability in there for you to pick what low risk means to you, kind of thing. So yeah, that one's huge for sure.
And I think out of the box, the feature you're talking about basically says if the app wants to do identity verification, and that's about it. That's allowed, and anything else requires additional approval.
Yeah,
So you're
exactly.
not you're not giving access to really anything but this is my email address and verifying who I am.
Yeah, and if you don't wrap some control around that at the beginning, it really can kind of run wild. I had a customer recently where um, we went in, the tenant had existed for a while, but they were upgrading licensing, so I was kind of helping them out. And I mean, there was well over 40, 50, 60 apps that users had been kind of putting in there, sort of thing. And he's like, wow, what's all this? And then we had to do
Yeah.
like a review of them all.
So on the topic of old, and maybe old's not the right word, on the topic of tenants that have been around for a long time, is there still the need to go in and make sure auditing is turned on the 365 side, or has that been done in the background now for all the old tenants now?
So it's funny you should say that. I run different security and compliance workshops, and one of the steps is to make sure it is on. I've never come across a tenant that has it off so far, so I think it must be on across the board now. But old tenants are kind of a good conversation. So some of you might not actually know this, but when you sign up for Office 365, basically you get the configuration at that point in time. It's almost like a server build, I guess, and and that kind of continues on the newer features. But with those older tenants, Microsoft does take a while to roll out some of the newer standards across them. Um, another, so I guess another example of that is probably security defaults and like blocking legacy authentication. Um, so security defaults is a tenant-wide feature that you can enable for a customer that maybe doesn't have business premium. They're not doing conditional access. They've got more basic licensing, but you want to get the tenant nice and secure. You turn this feature on, security defaults, and tenant-wide it'll enforce MFA, per user MFA. It'll block legacy authentication, which is like access from, for example, a POP3 email app that can bypass MFA and is sending all the passwords in clear text across the internet. And a few other kind of things in there as well. So with security defaults, if you sign up for a tenant today, it's on by default. But older environments, it's not. Um, so yeah, that's another piece. Um, and I guess thinking about legacy authentication, this is maybe one thing to call out too. So, as I mentioned, this is all about insecure protocols accessing Office 365, most commonly, like IMAP, POP, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Um, so, up until, well, for the most part, I disable that, whether it's via conditional access or you can go into the individual services to turn those protocols off. But later this year, I think it's in October, Microsoft is actually turning that off across all tenants. They've been kind of publicizing they're going to do it for a while. Um, and I just do a little call out to say, check in with your customers and see if they do have something that's using legacy protocols or legacy authentication where there could be an impact, like old multifunction devices, older applications that might be running, I don't know, like an industrial device or something like that, because you need to kind of help them plan for, how to continue have that service work in this new world of all of those insecure protocols being blocked.
Now, does Microsoft consider SMTP a legacy auth? I know there was just the right you can only use TLS 1.2 change, but when this comes later this year, do the MFPs that are using TLS 1.2 are they going to stop working as well?
Um, I don't know if they're treating that as a separate initiative. Actually, I would need to double check that one because I remember they did have a separate thing going where they said they were going to block TLS 1.2, but they've been kind of
Mm-hmm.
pushing it out because of COVID. So I don't know if that's kind of in a different category to the block and legacy authentication initiative.
So this might be focusing on POP IMAP kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Got it. You know, we can check what Microsoft has publicly said about it, but if it's anything like when TLS happened, it'll change like 12 times before the deadline anyway.
Yes, that's about accurate, yeah. Too funny.
Okay.
Let me just I'll pull up my little punch list here just to see if there's anything in it worth us talking about that we might not have
Yeah,
covered
that'd be
already.
awesome.
Let me see. So Matt, would you say that when your customer, or when, so you're mentioning that a lot of the MSPs, the customers are using Business Premium, which means they do have conditional access. Is it worth mentioning like a couple of different conditional access policies that are worth exploring to implement as kind of
Yeah,
like a
for
best
sure. I
practice?
I think for the I think a lot of customers and even a lot of MSPs basically have their conditional access policies have the require MFA box checked and have literally done nothing else with it. It would be
Okay,
helpful to go into other things that can be done.
yeah. Let,
So Gareth, I know a lot of organizations using conditional access use it for requiring multi-factor authentication in front of various SSO apps. What are some other fields or options in conditional access that organizations might be able to make use of?
so best practice conditional access policies that I like to kind of look at with my customers because when it comes to security, we've got to strike a balance between the availability of their systems, the ability for them to work, and securing confidentiality and the integrity of the data within those systems. So you can't just block everything. There's got to be a balance, otherwise your customer will hate you and go somewhere else.
Right.
That so that said, these are conversations to have with your customers to see what would be a fit. So conditional access is a really powerful tool. It's the heart of Microsoft's Zero Trust framework. It's the gatekeeper. It replaces that perimeter firewall of old. As such, there are some things we can do to it to kind of beef up the security posture and reduce the attack surface. Um, so from a business premium standpoint, going back to earlier, I talked a little bit about app protection policies and securing company data within those Microsoft applications so you can't copy and paste it off to a personal location, as an example. So one conditional access policy I always like to explore is, well, two actually in that flavor, requiring those Microsoft applications and blocking, which blocks access from like Apple Mail and things like that, if we're doing that lighter touch for BYOD. But also as well, um, if I'm doing device management and everything's kind of plugged into Intune, then I've got the ability to use the flag for requiring managed devices. And the situation where I like to try and use that is um, I recommend against allowing users typically to install the fat version of Office on their home PC and then use it to go and sign into corporate resources and have all of that corporate sensitive information synced down to an unmanaged home PC. Um, so by using conditional access, you can basically just block it to where an unmanaged device cannot sign in, like from the local Office apps to Office 365. That's quite a good one to do.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's really
there's,
powerful.
yeah. I mean, there might be some use cases where an organization wants to do that, but if you could at least kind of reduce the net of who can do that, then that reduces the attack surface there. Um, let's see. And two ways you can do that, either by using that managed devices kind of checkbox, or if it's a hybrid environment, there's a require like hybrid Azure AD join. You
Hmm.
can use that one too. Um, so other ones that I'd think about as well, blocking access from certain like countries or network locations. Um, if you've got a customer that all of their business is in the United States and they don't have a presence overseas, then you can go into conditional access. And the way I usually do it is there's like a kind of I think it's called trusted locations. You can go in there and define countries. Well, this is the way I do it anyway. There's a few ways to dice it up, but you can go in and define countries that are trusted. So we could just say, United States. And then you can create a policy that says only allow login from these locations. And I recommend using that wherever possible because honestly, I'll say like 90% of the environments that I've signed into that don't have that policy, there are sign-in attempts showing from certain countries that are known to do things that aren't nice.
Right. Not that we'll mention any on the public
Exactly.
podcast, but you know who we're talking about.
Yeah. So highly recommend exploring that. And the cool thing is, if someone really wants to work when they go on vacation to wherever, you can exclude them from that policy. There is a little bit of a management overhead there, obviously, but it's doable. Um, Even then, though, I'm not going to name and shame, but I have someone who I have a good relationship with, so I can say this, who I'd set this policy up for, and he had me exclude someone that was going on holiday to a beach place somewhere. And unfortunately, when they excluded them from the policy so they could work abroad, they actually connected to one of those kind of like fake malicious Wi-Fi networks at the resort. And luckily, there wasn't a breach because they saw things were looking weird and just turned it off. But yeah, just don't work when you're on vacation.
Right? I mean, that's such, it's a humorous story, but it's a good example that everything that we're doing, everything we talk about is really, at its core, risk mitigation, right? There's
Yeah,
still some residual risk left, even with all that stuff in place. The human element still exists.
for sure. And yeah, 100%.
Um, the only other thing I could think of, and we may or may not want to go into because it takes us into a whole different area, is at least having internally the conversation around do you want your users to be able to enroll devices? And this came up. Um, there was a story published on Bleeping Computer today about one of those proxy logon pages, right? They stole the session token, and one of the things that comes up with that is okay, a great mitigation is to require enrolled devices unless your threat actor can enroll his VM and bypass the entire thing. Um,
Yeah, that's tough. Um, so I guess that comes honestly, it's kind of a good thing to touch on in a way, and I'll say this. All of this stuff comes down to the organization's appetite for risk. At the end of the day, we're consultants there to support that business, and if the business wants to accept that risk because they don't want to be inhibited in that way, then we just have to support that decision. Um, that said, um, you've got autopilot within Endpoint Manager and Intune, the ability to do these zero trust deployments of devices where the device is kind of pre-registered from the service. I would imagine there probably is a way that we could lock it down so that if it's not autopilot enrolled already, then you can't enroll it. And that would be a good way to try and strike a bit of a balance there. Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of good ground. Maybe the last thing, and by the way, if you ever want to do one of these in the future, I'd be happy to, because I enjoy this stuff, um, on whatever topic or going into other topics. But I guess the last thing I'll mention on this one at least is, thinking about Business Premium, because it does have Azure AD Premium P1 in it, it gives us the ability to do single sign-on for third-party cloud applications. So that's where instead of someone logging into Salesforce using their Salesforce username and password, we're centralizing our identity on Azure Active Directory and enforcing users to sign into all of these different applications using that one credential. Um, that capability is there. Um, I would encourage MSPs to use it because I would imagine that there's probably a lot of organizations that maybe haven't taken that kind of maturity step yet because it's a little bit more advanced and maybe a feature that's not always been noticed inside Business Premium.
Yeah, it's one of the huge benefits because then the app that you connect right in your Salesforce example can then also have the protections of needs to be from an approved device or whatever other conditional access policies
Exactly.
you set in front of it.
Yeah, super powerful stuff. Um, so yeah, this
Okay.
was fun.
Um, so thanks for coming on, Gareth. I really appreciate the discussion and the time, and I hope everyone watching learned something, and we'll hope to do this again.
For sure. I appreciate it, Matt. Thanks for having me on. It was fun.